Mhm.
So our first speaker is Reyhane Rastgoo, and her topic is titled "When Positive Attitudes Are Not Enough: Lessons Learned from Human Brown Bear Conflict in Northern Iran." And she's a PhD student at Virginia Tech. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So, I'm Ray. I'm a PhD student at Virginia Tech, and today I want to present part of my research project back in Iran on attitudes and acceptability of killing brown bears in northern Iran. So, what is human-wildlife conflict? Human-wildlife conflict arises when behavior of wildlife and behavior of wildlife impact conservation goals and human interests, for example, preying on livestock or damaging crops. These impacts can be both real or perceived, and it can lead to dispute among groups of people. And in such situation, in order to achieve coexistence and resolve human-wildlife conflicts, it's really important to identify social factors that can impact behavior of people that are impacted by such conflict. So, talking about attitudes and acceptability, attitude is a key role in determining behavior and behavioral intention, and it is a positive or negative evaluation of a topic, such as killing an animal in a certain situation, such as killing bears in conflict situation. On the other hand, acceptability is judging the perceived reality with alternative options and choosing between the current and alternative option. For example, in here is deciding if killing a bear in a certain conflict situation is acceptable or not. So brown bears can cause agricultural damage and occasionally livestock depredation throughout the world, including in Iran. They are legally protected in Iran, but there are no compensation programs or law enforcement in case of a conflict situation and damage to crop or livestock. So in such situation, people and locals impacted by uh, such damages can choose lethal control for conflict resolution. So with that, we were interested to assess acceptability of killing bears based on interaction level and attitudes, which I will discuss what I mean by interaction level later, and also to test links between demographic, socioeconomic factors, and acceptability of killing brown bears. We expected that mean acceptability and consensus of killing bears are positively associated with level of human-bear interaction. So, for example, if level of human-bear interaction intensifies, people will be more accepting of killing bears and they will have more consensus regarding killing. We also expected that mean acceptability and consensus of killing bears are positively associated with negative attitudes. So basically, those with negative attitudes are more accepting of killing bears and they have more consensus. And finally, wealth and alternative source of income are associated with higher acceptance toward bears and being less accepting of killing bears. So where did we conduct our study? We conducted our study in Golestan province in Iran, which borders Caspian Sea and Turkmenistan. It includes different protected mammals and protected areas, including Golestan National Park, one of the biggest and historical national parks in Iran. However, this area contributes to 15% of brown bear mortality in the country and also ranks second for the frequency of bear killing in Iran. These are some beautiful pictures of rural areas in Iran at the edge of national park. So we used surveys with 5-point Likert scale to assess our attitudes and acceptability items. For acceptability, we included 4 scenarios. That is what I mean by human bear interaction scenarios. The first scenario was if a bear track was seen near their home, if they would agree or disagree with killing bear in that certain scenario. If the bear themselves were seen near their home, The third scenario was bear causing damage to their resources, including livestock or crops. And finally, bear attacking the respondent or the family member. For attitudes items, we ask that if they agree or disagree with these statements. So if bears are integral part of the forest, if they think that even if they never see bears, it is personally important for them that bears exist in that region, and if they think bears are a threat to humans and can cause economic losses. We also included demographic information such as age, education, gender, and also socioeconomic information such as number of livestock or beehives. So we ended up with interviewing 390 respondents above 18 years old face-to-face in 26 remote villages in Golestan province with confirmed presence of human-bear conflict. And here you can see the location of villages in Golestan province scattered throughout the province. And this is me interviewing local men and local women in some rural areas in Golestan. So for the methods, we use Cronbach's alpha to test reliability and internal consistency of our attitudes and acceptability items. We also use ANOVA and PERT tests for comparing mean acceptability across those four different scenarios that I just mentioned and among different groups of people, those with negative attitudes, those with neutral, and those with positive attitudes. We also use potential for conflict index 2 to assess consensus in each scenario and cumulative linear mixed models for socioeconomic predictors such as age, gender, and additional factors. So our results skewed more toward males with 8 males to 2 females, and this is because of cultural challenges for interviewing females in rural areas. And our mean age was 43.1. More than 60% of people had low or no formal education. They were primarily dependent on farming and followed by livestock, and about half of them had alternative income sources beyond traditional sources such as farming. So in this graph, you can show that people hold positive attitudes, slightly positive attitudes toward bears in the area. So I need to unpack this graph. On the x-axis, you can see different scenarios that I just mentioned. Seeing a track, seeing the bear themselves, bear damaging and bear attacking the respondent or family members. On the y-axis, you can see that if they agree or disagree with killing bears in these certain scenarios. So these numbers show mean acceptability of killing across scenarios, and the bubble size shows the level of consensus. So the smaller bubble and circle shows higher consensus and less potential for conflict in this scenario. So for the first scenario and second scenario, as you can see, people disagreed with killing bears if they see the track or the bear, and you can see that they have pretty high consensus in these scenarios. For the third scenario, you can see that it is leaning toward neutral and they are becoming more accepting of killing if the bear damages their properties. And you can see that the circle size is bigger, so they have less consensus and they have more conflicting opinions if the killing is acceptable or not. And for the fourth scenario, you can see that it surpasses the neutral line and people agree with killing bears if the bear attacks a human or their family member. And you can see that the bubble size is really large, so they have less consensus and they have more conflicting opinions in this scenario. So this graph also shows the acceptability of killing bear across different scenarios, but across different attitudes groups. So the black circle shows those with negative attitudes, the pattern one shows those with neutral attitudes, and the gray one shows those with positive attitudes. So in the first scenario, you can see that all of those groups disagree with killing bears. But however, you can see that those with negative attitudes have less consensus. So they have more conflicting opinion about whether they should or should not kill bears across this scenario. In the next scenario, you can see that those with negative attitudes are surpassing the neutral line and they are becoming more accepting of killing bears, even if they see bear near their home. And again, you can see that those with negative and neutral attitudes have less consensus, whereas those with positive have more consensus and they're pretty sure that it's not acceptable to kill bears across this scenario. On the third scenario where bear damages their properties, you can see that all of them have low consensus and they are becoming really more accepting of killing bears. Even those with negative attitudes are accepting of killing bears. And on the fourth scenario, you can see that they are all accepting of killing bears if the bear attacks human or any family member. However, the interesting thing is that those with negative attitudes have high consensus in this scenario. So they're on the same page that killing bear is acceptable for sure in this scenario. So how about determinants of acceptability of killing bears across different scenarios that I just discussed? So for this scenario B, where they see bear near their home, those with higher education, alternative source of income, and older people were less accepting of killing bears, whereas female were more accepting of killing them. For the third scenario, which is bear damaging their property, those with higher education were less accepting of killing bears. And for the fourth scenario, where bear attacks human, those with higher education, with alternative source of income, and older people were less accepting of killing them. So overall, based on our results, we think that people generally have positive attitudes toward bears and think that killing bears is unacceptable in this province. However, we found evidence that positive attitudes do not always support coexistence or pro-conservation behavior. So there is no direct link between positive attitudes and positive behavior. And as you saw, consensus varies with conflict scenarios and among different attitude groups. So the first scenario, people had more consensus, whereas for the fourth scenario, there was less consensus. Also, there are additional factors that can impact acceptability of killing bears, such as age, education, and gender. So those with younger people, those with lower education and female respondents were more supportive of killing, whereas those with alternative source of income were less supportive. So for the implication, we have 5 recommendations to facilitate human-bear coexistence in this area and hopefully protect brown bears. So the first one is leveraging positive attitudes. So having a group of advocates, especially those with favorable attitudes toward bears, to increase awareness among people. The next one is inclusive education and outreach. As we mentioned, younger people and female were more accepting of killing bears, so having education and outreach programs to increase their awareness or increase their ability, coping ability, and skills in conflict situation can be really helpful. Having timely mitigation in conflict scenarios, so having groups of emergency conflict mitigation team that can act fast in conflict scenario in order to prevent retaliatory killing can be really helpful. Having customized strategies for alternative livelihoods, as mentioned, those with alternative source of income had positive attitudes toward birds and were less accepting of killing them. So having alternative livelihoods and diversifying income sources, such as through ecotourism or income sources that matches people's skills and preference can be also helpful. And finally, focusing on preventive approaches in bear management. So, for example, motivating people to um, harvest their crop in a timely manner or uh, to um, to help them through monitoring their coping methods in order to ensure that those methods are effective. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the co-authors, Daniel Nayeri, which is present today, Aliurza Mohammadi, Alistair Bath, and Mohammed Farhadinia, and also all the local communities whose participation made our study possible. And also the paper from this research was recently published in People and Nature Journal. I would be happy to send it over, so feel free to email me or message me on LinkedIn. I can also paste the link on the chat. Thank you so much. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And questions will be taken in the chat because of the lack of time. We do apologize. And we're very grateful that you are okay with that. We will move towards the next speaker. So our next speaker is Pourya Sardari, and his topic is titled Framing Wildlife as Pets, Instagram's Role in Squirrel Trafficking in Iran. And he is a PhD student at Texas A&M University, US. Over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. As I'm Pourya. I'm a PhD student in the Human Dimensions of Natural Resources Lab at Texas A&M, and I'll be talking about squirrel trade in Iran. Before I start, I want to thank the other co-authors who helped with different stages of this project. Wildlife trafficking, it's a global issue. It drives species to extinction. It can transmit diseases, and also some animals that are being traded for pets, either intentionally or unintentionally, could be released into the wild, and they could become invasive species. There has been studies that show direct link of species going extinct because of trade, and in this study, you can see that mammals are among one of the top groups of animals that are being targeted for trade. 23 species have gone globally extinct because of trade, and 71 species are locally extinct, and 95 species are about to go extinct because of overhunting, traditional medicine, or pets or luxury items. When it comes to wildlife trade, Asia is a major importer and exporter of illegal and legal wildlife trade. But when it comes to Central Asia and the Middle East, it hasn't been studied like Asia, and there's lack of regulation. And in the Middle East, Iran is a country that hasn't wildlife trade hasn't been studied in Iran extensively like other parts of the world. But it also acts as a major intersection between Asia and Europe. And as you can see here, there are major trade roads that go through Iran, which could facilitate trade. Iran also could act as a source because of it's some of the endemic species who live in Iran, like the Kaiser nose, spider-tailed viper, like Asiatic cheetah. They are native to Iran, and they could be targeted for the trade. In this study, we are going to focus on a Kazakh's squirrel, or the Persian squirrel, or Iranian squirrel. It goes by different names. It has a decreasing population globally, but it's considered least concerned. It's the only tree squirrel in Iran, and it's important for forest health. It can disperse. It's important for dispersing tree seeds. Its population is also declining in Iran, and nationally, it is considered endangered. And there is a national ban for its trade in Iran. But despite that, these are being offered for sale as pets. In a previous study that we've done on multiple groups of species in Iran, we found evidence of squirrels being traded. So we wanted to focus on this species and to see how the trade is in Iran. So we have two main objectives. The first one is to quantify the scale of squirrel trade on Instagram in Iran, and to examine how squirrels are being advertised, including the language, imagery, and strategies to attract buyers. To do this study, we used Instagram because it's predominant in Iran. Many people use it, and we surveyed it from May 8th, 2020 to 2023. And every night at midnight, we scroll through Instagram accounts and posts and manually collecting data. And we didn't interact with the users, and we collected public available data. And we use descriptive statistics, simple statistics to analyze the trade. And for the content analysis part, we use a reflexive thematic analysis where I first familiarize myself with the data, and then I did the initial coding, and then other co-authors who were also familiar with the data commented on it and refined the codes. And here is an example of how the posts look like. So either they were on Instagram stories or Instagram posts. They had some like caption or like geographical location on them, or like phone number, or like they like mentioned the condition of the animal. Like here they're saying that it's like a baby squirrel, like feeding them with a syringe. We found a total of 1,204 advertisements selling thousands and 494 individuals. Majority of these individuals were juveniles, and only 34 ads reported geographical location, where a majority of the ads were coming from Tehran province, Tehran city, and only 25 ads reported the price. So majority of the ads mentioned that you need to contact them like via direct message so that they can tell you the price. And we didn't want to do that. In other studies that we done, like on turtles, we found that majority of the ads also come from Tehran province. So this could mean that like Tehran province, which is also like the capital city in Iran, which could be like the major hub for wildlife trafficking in Iran. In terms of like when the advertisements were being posted the most, we found that during May and August, we have the highest peaks of advertisement, and this coincides with the bursting season of squirrels in Iran. They give birth twice a year, and we found that, but we did not find any like significant seasonal pattern in the advertisement. Unlike other studies that we've done, that we found that during spring and summer species like there's higher advertisement for species. Like, for instance, here we did a study on carnivores, and we found that native species have higher advertisement during spring and summer. And also here we see the same trend for other species. Now, moving on to the themes that emerged from the data, emphasis on tameness was the main theme that emerged on in this data. 90% of the ads like showed animals being handheld or like being pet, or had like being outside of cage with a collar around their neck, like showcasing that these animals are tame and like suitable for being pet. Um, the other theme that emerged was like marketing languages to stimulate purchase. For instance, like available now, limited quantity, healthy, vaccinated, or like we do shipments. For instance, like here it says that this squirrel comes with like its clothing and other like stuff and appliances for like keeping it as a pet. And also like you can contact them via Telegram, and they can send it to other parts of Iran. And they also mentioned that they are from Tehran. The other theme that emerged, which was also like interesting personally for me, is that the traders were trying to legitimize their trade through captive breeding and reproduction. So that they were mentioning that like these species, like these animals are being captive bred. They were claiming it. We don't know that if it was true. We didn't see any like evidence that these animals are like breeding in captivity. And they were like mentioning that their reproductive status that are being suitable for like captive breeding, like they were mentioning like female, male, like adult male or like adult female. One of the interesting parts was that one of the sellers mentioned that they are using IVF to breed these animals, which I think it's like crazy. And yeah, so these themes that emerge like reflect broader wildlife commodification and exotic pet ownership in other countries like Indonesia, where people are using similar marketing strategies, similar like strategies to legitimize their trade. The main key takeaways for this study is that juveniles dominate the trade. So either they're actually being captive bred because they're breeding them and it's like selling them as like babies, so that it's like more easy to like hand tame them and keep them as pets, or they're actually being captured from the wild, which is like concerning. We didn't see any seasonal trade pattern in a squirrel trade, but we saw peaks in like birthing months of squirrels, unlike other like species that we saw that there's this clear seasonal pattern. And sellers use targeted marketing strategies to drive their sales. So a couple of the conservation implications that can come up out of this study is that there's need for strengthened online surveillance and social media, like Instagram, like the mother company Meta needs to do a better job of tracking these and like making it easier for users to report these accounts. And also local authorities could help with like other community members on Instagram who can report these and they can be tracked down and potentially be taken down. And also because like in Iran, there's like a lack of resources and not enough like people to do this, like only focusing on the season and like geographical locations that like poaching is happening and like doing also like focusing on like Tehran, for example, which is like the hub for trade, only focusing in these parts that could like track down the operations and potentially confiscate the animals. And also, again, at the same time, but like we see the peak ads on Instagram, campaigns could be launched to shift demand from squirrels being as pets instead of like portraying squirrels as like cute pets suitable for pets. Campaigns could like show that these animals are not suitable for pet and like show the ethical like concerns around keeping squirrels as pet and like all the problems that they could cause and like trying to shift public demand from keeping these animals as pets. And thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And also here's the QR code for my social media and email account. And you can like email me directly and we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. As mentioned before, we will take Q&A through the chat. I hope that is okay, and thank you for accommodating us as well. Uh, with that, we will move to our next speaker. Natalie Juliet Sanchez is our next speaker, and her topic is titled "Challenging Pest Narratives through Environmental Justice." Natalie is a bachelor's student at California State University, LA. Over to you.
Hi. Hello everyone. My name is Natalie Sanchez. I am a fourth year undergraduate honor student at California State University of Los Angeles. I am majoring in liberal studies with the customized focus of environmental studies. In today's presentation, I'll be talking about challenging pest narratives through environmental justice. As a Melamaze Fellow, I had a great opportunity to work on an undergraduate research project. And in my research, I will go over how we think about rodents and what that means for our environment and our communities. So let us begin. I want to first share my overall thesis. So my project looks at how pest control practices harm ecosystems and how the stories we tell about pests often end up blaming and stigmatizing low-income communities. Another part of my thesis, which I didn't include on the slide, is how indigenous knowledge in Southern California may offer some safer alternatives to rat poisoning and how those practices can be reintroduced today. This is an interdisciplinary project that brings together methods from an ethnographic field notes, indigenous knowledge, and cultural studies. But for today's talk, I'll be focusing on what I've learned through my ethnographic field notes by hosting environmental education tables for the National Park Service. These conversations with the public reveal gaps in knowledge about the harmful impacts of pest control on both the environment and human communities. So today's presentation is really about what my field notes reveal. And here you can see a picture of myself just interacting with the public at the educational pop-up tables that I was hosting. So during the past year, I interned for the National Park Service in the Santa Monica Mountains, where I worked under a biologist who runs a program called Nature Neighbor. This program sends staff, including me, to public events to host environmental educational workshops about local wildlife, ways to coexist with them, and the dangers of rodenticide poisoning. As part of that work, I created and ran my very own pop-up educational tables at the park's visitor centers. At these events, I share information about the impact of rodenticide on wildlife and talk with community members about their perception of pests. To better understand my field notes, it's important to get a sense of what rodenticides are and the impacts that they have on wildlife. So just to let you know, this conversation that I'm bringing up about rat poison may be triggering to some folks. So I'm going to begin. Modern methods of pest control. Across Los Angeles, you see these black boxes or ABA's pipes tucked along buildings such as schools, parks, grocery stores, restaurants, anywhere people want to keep rodents away. They're so common that we don't really question them, and many times barely even notice them. They feel like they're part of the landscape. These stations are a common practice that is used to poison rats and reduce the rat population. Something that you might not know is that anticoagulant rodenticide, which is a common type of rat poison, affects the entire animal food chain. When a rodent eats the bait, it doesn't die immediately as you would think. It can take about 5 to 10 days for the poison to fully work. During that time, the rodent keeps returning to the bait and accumulates more poison. It becomes slower, more vulnerable, making it an easier target for predators. When a predator eats the poisoned rodent, it injects the toxin too. This is called secondary poisoning, and it can significantly increase the animal risk of mortality. So just a really quick overview. So this is the food chain that I got from the National Park Service. So it all starts with the rodenticide poison. It can affect our domestic pets and our rodents, which is our squirrels, rabbits, and our rats, and who eat them. Our hawks, our bobcats, our coyotes, and then eventually goes up to the mountain lions. So, according to the National Park Service research, 98% of mountains that have been tested are positive with anticoagulant rodenticide poisoning. That is quite a lot. But these pest management practices also tell a deeper story. They show that we accepted poison as one of the only solutions and that certain animals are considered disposable or dangerous. That's why this research isn't only about rodenticide as a toxic solution, it's about challenging the culture narratives behind them, the ones that tell us that some animals are worth saving while others are worth killing. It's about reimagining our relationship to urban wildlife, especially animals that we've been taught to fear or hate. So this is just a disclaimer slide for my following slide. This might be triggering to some folks. So part of my job at these pop-up tables was to hand out National Park Service flyers that summarize the problem of the anticoagulant rodenticide. On the front of the flyer, it shows the harsh reality of how poison affects animals. So here you can see a picture of a coyote that had died from secondary poisoning, but was made worse by mange disease. So mange is a skin disease that is caused by mites and is fairly common in wildlife. But when an animal ingests the poison rodent, their bodies can't heal naturally as they would normally be able to. And that combination, unfortunately, just often leads to death. And on the back side of the handout, there's a checklist of safer alternatives that people could use instead of relying on poison. The goal was to give participants something tangible to take home as a reminder of the problem and that there are safer alternatives to rodent exclusion methods. So here's the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy Educational Program. So at my pop-up tables, I was holding at places within the national park called Kingeland Ranch and Rancho Cerro Vista visitor centers. I gave about a 15-minute talk on topics such as mountain lions, the Wallace Annenberg Wildlife Crossing Bridge, the threatened species like California red-legged frog, anticoagulant rodenticide poisoning and safer alternatives for rodent control, and important roles of raptors. To make these events more interactive, I distributed up to 3 junior ranger pins that was giving out a mountain, an ocean, and then a valley pin, and to participants who attended. And before each event, I created lesson plans to guide my talks. Measurable results. So over 4 months, I ran 9 pop-ups at the Santa Monica Mountains Visitor Centers. Each pin, the mountain, ocean, and the valley pin, had 3 opportunities to be earned. In total, I reached about 288 community members. The number represents a really wide range of participants from families with adults to kids. What stood out to me was the 6 to 8 people that came back again to earn the rest of the other pins. That showed me that the pins really worked as an incentive to keep people engaged. Now for my feed notes and public feedback. In my pop-ups, I experimented various ways of taking field notes. In method 1, here on the left side, it was for the anticoagulant rodenticide pop-up that I was hosting. I tried handwritten notes, quick voice recording, and drawing notes on my phone. I didn't write much during this event itself just because there were just so many people coming by, but I did capture enough conversations to reflect on. From those notes, on the first things, the one of the first things that I've noticed was how different the two visitor centers were. At King Juliet Ranch, many visitors already knew about rodenticides and their impacts on wildlife, since most of the attendees were locals from the area. In contrast, the audience at Rancho Cerro Vista was more diverse, and for many of them, the information I shared was entirely new. Across both sites, a few themes did stood out to me. Many people were shocked to learn how far poison travels up the food chain. One visitor told me, "I thought the poison just stayed in the box. I had no idea it was killing the owls and the bobcats." That kind of reaction shows how little is understood about the broader impacts of rodenticides. I also noted frustration with some of the exclusion methods that I was recommending, like snap traps, which participants felt like rats were just too smart for. Others offered even their own ideas, from upside down snap traps with peanut butter to loud radios. Some people expressed their outright hatred for wildlife, while others were eager to explore coexistence with them. And beyond rats, gophers kept coming up again and again as a bigger concern. Even during my California red-legged frog pop-up, someone still brought up the issue of gophers, even if the topic was solely based on frogs, which I thought was very interesting. These conversations highlighted the challenges in public education. People are aware of the problems, but many are still looking for quick and easy solutions. So for my method two, I experimented with a different type of technique described in a book called Naked Field Notes by Daniela Elliott and Matthew Wolfmeyer that I often referred to when I was practicing ethnographic field notes. This approach, which I attempted digitally, was also inspired by my guidance from the chair of my department. The authors encourage writing field notes in two columns. So on the left side, it's recording raw evidence of what I saw or heard. And on the right side, it was expanding my interpretation of what stood out and why. For example, during my pop-up for the mountain lions and the wildlife crossing bridge, on the left I wrote, "One person didn't know who P22 was." P22, just for quick context, he was a well-known Los Angeles mountain lion. And on the right, I reflected, "This stood out to me because it showed me that not everyone who visits is already informed. It reminded me how important it is to keep presentations beginner-friendly and not assume prior knowledge." I was generally surprised by this moment because P22 was often described as the LA celebrity. Realizing that not everyone recognizes his name pushed me to rethink how I should frame my talks. Using this structure helped me not only capture the conversations, but also immediately begin analyzing them and helped me find ways to fix my lesson plans and shape my discussions. Since I'm still in the early stages of analysis, these conclusions are preliminary. So first, there are gaps in my program. Visitors consistently asked about gophers, which weren't really covered in my materials. The program that I was creating was overall too narrow, mostly focusing on rats and squirrels. Even though I wanted to give direct answers, I often couldn't just because the National Park Service itself has limited research on gopher exclusions as far as I have looked. I also noticed that adults more than kids drove many of the conversations, which shows me the need to adapt to content for more mixed audiences. And finally, some of the exclusion techniques I shared felt ineffective to participants. From those gaps, I have a few key overall takeaways. The biggest theme is the tension between ecology versus convenience. Rodenticides remain the default because they're easy to access, while safer alternatives take longer to take effect and are less understood. Education gaps reinforce this pattern. Comments like, "I give up and call pest control," direct to reliance on poison. To shift that, we need to have multi-species education, not just about rats, but about gophers, squirrels, and other type of wildlife as well. This connects back to my broader goal. My project is not just about encouraging people to go to pop-ups, but about helping reframe the narratives around pests. By shifting those narratives, I hope to make I hope to make more effective and reduce our dependence on poison. Overall, many of my preliminary conclusions are still in work in progress, and I aim to provide more direct answers as my research advances. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback of what I should look for in my field notes as I continue redefining my work. And here is just my annotated bibliography slide, some of the books that I have been analyzing. Here's also the scholarly sources that I have read. And here is a list of next readings that I want to look into for my research. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Um, as mentioned before, we will unfortunately take questions through the chat. So please feel free to answer them there. But thank you so much. And thank you for educating so many people on this very important topic. Because almost always whatever is easy is what human beings do. And it's disastrous to the human themselves, but they don't care. So thank you for that. Our last speaker for this session is Claire Musser. Her presentation title is Co-Thriving as Ethical Practice Navigating Conflict and Care Among Wolves, Cows, and Humans. And Claire is the executive director of the Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project, a PhD student at Falmouth University.
All right, I'll get started. So yeah, my name is Claire Musser. I'm the Executive Director of the Grand Canyon Wolf Recovery Project, where I advocate for the recovery of the most endangered subspecies of wolf in North America, the Mexican grey wolf, while also recognizing them as sentient individuals with intrinsic worth. Alongside this work, I'm pursuing a PhD in anthrozoology and environmental photography and film. My research, Co-Thriving as Ethical Practice, Navigating Conflict and Care Among Wolves, Cattle and Humans, explores multi-species entanglements, particularly how humans and carnivores can learn to live together on our shared landscapes. As a practice-based researcher, I use visual storytelling as a methodology. My forthcoming short film, Bears in Hot Tubs, explores human-black bear relationships in Los Angeles. Building on that, my doctoral work turns towards wolves, cattle, and humans in multi-use landscapes of Washington state, places where culture, cultural identity, political ideology, and ecological necessity all converge. And I guess I'm just assuming you can see the screen, right? So, this work is deeply collaborative. I partner with Daniel Curry, a range rider and founder of Project Griff, guarding the respective interests of predators and humans. Daniel has spent decades riding with cattle and wolves, removing carcasses, reading signs, and adapting in real time to prevent conflict. His field-based expertise is the backbone of our approach, and together we combine his lived knowledge with my research and storytelling. Our project is a form of participatory action research. We don't stand apart as outside observers. We embed ourselves directly in conflict zones, working with ranchers, wolves, and cattle in real time. The aim is to not simply study, but co-create knowledge, to document what becomes possible when all species are recognised as active participants. This research will be presented in both academic and public forums through a forthcoming book chapter and documentary series. At its core, this presentation asks, what happens when we move beyond coexistence, a fragile tolerance that often collapses under pressure, towards co-thriving? So co-thriving is an ethics of care and harm reduction, acknowledging conflict, compromise, and compassion across species. Conservation here is not science or policy, it's an ethical practice shaped by relationship, risk, and shared responsibility. And you guys are seeing the main screen, right, without my notes, I'm guessing. Take that as a yes.
Yeah, it's all good, Claire.
Oh yeah, sorry, because I'm on two screens and a little laptop. So cattle in the Western beef industry live lives that are constrained and will end prematurely. Their presence on public and private lands is a reality we can't simply wish away. While beef consumption is declining in some places, demand remains strong, and the presence of cattle defines landscapes across the Western United States. Here, wolves are still being killed. They are lethally controlled when calves are lost or even when they're suspected of lingering near cattle. Counties in Arizona, New Mexico, and California have gone so far as to declare emergencies over wolf presence. Fueling hysteria and misinformation, these narratives are gaining traction at the highest level of government. Some conservation groups argue the solution is to remove ranching entirely, but this overlooks what happens next. Land fragmentation, an increase in housing and hobby ranches, heightened tensions, and ultimately more dead wolves. Raising cattle doesn't erase conflict, it will likely increase it. Range riding at its simplest means placing human presence on the landscape to deter predators and reduce livestock losses. In practice, though, it can look very different depending on who is doing it. I've seen the transformation. I've seen a fourth generation rancher who once shot predators, now sharing videos of wolves interacting calmly with his cattle. This didn't come from reading a how-to guide on conflict mitigation. It came from a shift in mindset, from learning to read the land and respond in real time. For agencies, often understaffed and under-resourced, range riding can be inconsistent and reactive. Some riders are also ranchers and only check pastures sporadically or document predation after it's already occurred. Telemetry data, when shared at all, arrives late and only reveals the location of a single collared wolf, while the rest of the pack moves invisibly across the landscape. This makes it nearly impossible to respond in real time. By contrast, in my years working in wolf recovery, I've only met one range rider whose methodology truly fills this gap. Daniel Curry and his team go beyond the baseline definition of range riding. They care deeply about the people, wolves, and the cattle. They live alongside cattle and wolves for weeks at a time, removing livestock carcasses that might attract predators. He teaches his team to read wolf signs and tracks daily, adapting their strategy to conditions on the ground. They also practice low-stress livestock handling to rebuild herd instincts so cattle can defend themselves collectively when wolves approach. This is the difference between range riding as a job description and range riding as a practice of presence, ethics, and care. The first is about ticking boxes for agencies. The second is about shaping landscapes where conflict becomes unnecessarily, where wolves, cattle, and humans can co-thrive. This brings me to the idea of compassionate conservation, a movement in conservation biology and ethics that asks us to value the lives of individual animals, not just populations or species. Animals are not simply units of management, they are sentient beings with their own intrinsic worth. This is especially important in wolf recovery, where policy often reduces wolves to numbers on a population chart or problems to be removed. Compassionate conservation challenges the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is built around managing nature as a resource. That model reinforces a management mentality, wolves as competitors with hunters and ranchers, cattle as commodities, and landscapes as production units. Instead, compassionate conservation encourages us to lead with empathy, recognizing wolves, cattle, and humans as participants in a shared landscape. The reality is that current mitigation is fragmented and reactive. Wolves are rarely valued as stakeholders in their own survival. Even some conservation organisations reduce wolf deaths to statistics, dismissing them as bumps in the road to recovery. And while tools like flaggery, range riding, or compensation payments exist, they often treat symptoms rather than causes. Compensation, in particular, is essentially paying for failure. It does nothing to prevent future losses. What's missing is an ethical framework to guide how we use these tools. My research is grounded in relational ethics and harm reduction. Wolves are not subjects to manage, but autonomous participants. Their movements, their choices, their family structure guide the work. Through practices like range riding and low-stress livestock handling, we help cattle avoid predation while giving wolves the opportunity to survive. Tom Van Doren and Deborah Bird Rose describe this as responsibility, the ability to notice, respond, and care across difference. It's about cultivating attentiveness to wolves, cattle, and human neighbours as participants in shared survival. Critics of compassionate conservation often ask, well, what does that look like in practice? And this is exactly where my work with Project Griff and the co-thriving model steps in. Co-thriving goes a bit further than coexistence. Coexistence says, you stay over there and I'll stay over here. Co-thriving says, we share this place and our futures are bound together. It shows compassionate conservation on the ground as harm reduction, trust building, and daily presence on the land. It envisages landscapes where wolves, cattle, and humans mutually adapt and flourish. It recognises wolves not as symbols of wilderness or villains of ranch life, but as neighbours. The ethic is rooted in compassion, valuing the lives of individual animals, not just populations, responsibility, cultivating attentiveness and care, and egomorphism, seeing animals not as human-like projections, but as beings like us, autonomous, sentient with their own social worlds. This is not idealism. It's a pragmatic ethics for survival in entangled landscapes. So let's talk directly about harm. Non-lethal deterrents like hazing, noise, or even range riding itself disrupt wolves' lives. Imagine being shot at with a rubber bullet and chased off by a pack of dogs. Range riders use fear. They push wolves away from places they might otherwise roam. These practices don't erase harm, but they reduce it, buying wolves a chance to survive, helping cattle adapt, and giving human communities the space to reimagine their relationship with predators. But that short-term stress can prevent a far greater harm, the lethal removal of an entire family, helicopter gunners, poison carcasses, and orphan pups. Conservation here is not about eliminating harm, it's about reducing it across species. It acknowledges that wolves operate on risk versus reward. When the risk of approaching cattle is too high, they return to wild prey. The ethical tension is real. We harm wolves a little to save them from being harmed a lot. And we ask cattle whose lives are already predetermined to end prematurely to adapt once more. Let me ground this in a story. The Onion Creek Pack in Northeast Washington. The pack lived in a patchwork of forest, ranches, and private allotments. Their lives unfolded in the constant presence of cattle and humans. For ranchers, their house carried fear and resentment. For conservationists, they symbolized resilience. Curry worked in their territory. His role was not only to keep cattle safe, but to mediate between species. He used non-lethal deterrents, low-stress livestock handling, and most importantly, presence. One evening, as wolves approached a herd of cattle, something remarkable happened. Instead of scattering in panic, the cattle slowly turned as one body, forming a defensive circle. They advanced shoulder to shoulder until the wolves withdrew. No shots were fired, no cars were lost. This outcome wasn't luck. It was the result of years of rebuilding herd instincts, calming cattle through patient handling, and teaching them to respond as a unified group. Wolves read risk versus reward. In that moment, the reward wasn't worth the risk. And yet outside Curry's patrol area, state-sanctioned lethal removals fractured the pack. Several wolves were killed, their house shifting from harmony to mournful disarray. It revealed the stark limits of reactive management. The Onion Creek Pack teaches us two truths. Non-lethal strategies can work, but without policy and cultural change, violence will return. The co-thriving model I'm working on with Project Griff reframes conservation around four principles: early intervention, relational trust, ethical clarity, and shared resilience. These aren't abstract values. They're grounded in lived practice: range riding, carcass removal, low-stress livestock handling, and long-term presence on the land. They are about being there before conflict escalates, about building accountability with rural communities, about recognizing wolves as autonomous beings with families, and about reshaping ranching practices for sustainability. What distinguishes this work is that it rejects the control group model, which is so common in institutional studies. Too often, wolf livestock conflict is treated like a laboratory trial. One group gets flattery, another group gets range riding, and the outcomes are measured through human-animal relationships, reduced to isolated variables. Our research explicitly resists this reductionism. As we've argued in our grant and research proposals, conflict resolution is not a lab experiment. It's a cultural, emotional, and place-based practice. Instead, we use demonstration sites in active conflict zones to show what is possible when ethics and trust guide the process. We gather oral histories, narrative inquiry, and community interviews to document not just ecological outcomes, but relational and cultural ones. This will result in a book chapter that situates co-thriving as an ethical practice and a documentary series that explores these multi-species entanglements through story and film. This integrated analysis of recent studies underscores why this matters. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife reported a 9% decline in wolf numbers for the first time in 16 years, with 40 deprivation events. Range riding in many cases remains inconsistent and reactive. Some riders simply document predation rather than prevent it. By contrast, our co-thriving approach emphasizes consistent, ethically grounded range riding and trust building. Ultimately, this is about shifting from control to care, from reaction to relationship. Wolves are not invaders, they are co-inhabitants with agency and culture. Their family structure, hunting traditions, and emotional lives mirror our own in striking ways. True success will come when wolf, cattle, and human survival no longer feels like a zero-sum game. I've seen glimpses of this during a time of crisis. Recently, after a wildfire in Washington, we were offered a place to stay during the evacuation. We are people who normally stood on opposite sides, hunters and ranchers, and me as an urban vegan. We shared beers and a conversation about biodiversity. We didn't agree on everything, but there was some common ground, a desire for a healthy landscape. Economically, too, co-thriving can work. Ranchers raising fewer cattle but earning more for predator-friendly beef, communities investing in resilience rather than reactivity, wolves surviving not as tolerated intruders, but accepted neighbours with an ecological role on the landscape. So what does co-thriving demand of us? In the end, conflict is a choice. We can continue down the path of reactive killing, or we can choose co-thriving, imperfect, compassionate, and deeply relational. We need to care about everybody in this story, wolves, ranchers, and cattle. Real change will come not from fear, but from love. And thank you. And then I've just got a slide of references if anybody is interested.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, for showing us that uh every player can be acknowledged, and everybody needs to be acknowledged in this collective space that we call home. So thank you for that. We will do Q&A through the chat box, and I will hand this back over to Chris and her wonderful team.